All right, so this webinar today, I think, can drastically change your success in looking for a position. And what I will tell you at the outset is that if you understand what I'm going to be talking about today, you're literally by probably multiple times, like 5 times, 10 times, may increase the effectiveness of your resume, the number of jobs you're able to get, and also firms that are willing to talk to you and bring you back, and how well you do in resumes, do in interviews. Excuse me, getting interviews. What I'm going to talk about, I've over the course of my career, there's been, now it says 500,000 in this, but there's been over 700,000 attorneys that have submitted their resume to us, and I've actually reviewed them all. I'm the only person in the company that reviews them when they come in. And I'm going to talk to you about the things that I look for before that kind of determine someone's marketability and whether or not they'll get jobs. And I also will review the resumes of all the candidates that come in that I work with and also fix them. And almost every single time when I fix a resume, someone will go from not getting a lot of interviews to getting many more interviews than they were getting before. So there's a lot of mistakes that people make on their resumes. Most attorneys make these mistakes. I would say the number of attorneys that make these mistakes are probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 85%. Attorneys will often get smarter the longer they practice. For some reason, attorneys in the largest law firms don't make these mistakes as often. And I think that it's almost like the law of natural selection because they're not making these mistakes and it's helping them get jobs. So I'm going to talk to you about really the most important resume rules. This is extremely important. If you watch this and understand it, it could change the course of your career in life because you're probably making a lot of these mistakes. And these mistakes get you rejected and not seen by law firms and hold you back. I've had so many experiences correcting resumes and making kind of the changes I'm going to talk about today, where people might have spent months just applying to jobs and not getting any interviews. And then suddenly, after making these changes, they're getting multiple interviews, multiple offers, and all this sort of stuff is happening. But you can significantly improve your odds of getting positions and how well you do in your career, the things that happen if you make these changes. Okay, so just real quickly. Okay, just real quick, I'll talk about these sponsors and stuff after, but let's see. Many of these resume mistakes end up damaging people's futures. People will make these mistakes when they're in law school and not get jobs. People will not get jobs that are as good as they could get by making these mistakes. And people literally are destroying their careers and all the time they spend in law school and in their previous positions and getting jobs by making these mistakes. And this, what I'm going to talk about, literally should be like required reading and watching for every law school student and every lateral attorney, because this is that important. It's extremely important because most people are making these mistakes. And when they make them, they're holding themselves back. They may get positions out of luck. They may get positions because there's not enough applicants, but it holds them back. And also, your resume is not just something that you use to get jobs. It's often something that helps you get clients later on in your career. So how well you make, what you do with your resume, the changes you make are going to help you. Also, I'm going to talk to, I know a lot of law firms watch these webinars, and so I'm going to talk to you, if you're a law firm, about why people that make these mistakes are going to be probably bad hires, because they're literally showing you on their resume why they're bad hires. So the odds are that you're showing firms on your resume right now why you might be a bad hire. And so extremely important stuff. And most recruiters don't understand what I'm going to talk about. They're mainly looking for a very certain type of attorney with a certain type of experience, and usually from large law firms, best law schools, 2 to 5 or 6 years of experience, but they're not looking at the resumes of people in all practice areas, which I do. So I place people in every practice area, every size firm, and I watch what happens. I've tracked it. I've tracked $100 million, $200 million, whatever the number is of placements that our companies made, but the people that law firms pay for, what their resumes look like, what they don't. And so these mistakes I'm going to talk about can have major consequences for making them. And so I'm going to tell you how not just top law firms, but smaller law firms often review resumes. Prestigious law firms with recruiting departments and very usually sophisticated attorneys reviewing resumes, knowing what works and what doesn't, often results in attorneys and getting positions and not getting positions. So they review resumes in a certain way. Often the larger and the older and the better firms have very specific ways of reviewing resumes. And if you do certain things on your resume, you're never going to get a job with them. So understanding this perspective is really helpful. And again, I've placed thousands of attorneys. I have to, anytime our company represents a candidate, we put a lot of money and resources into representing them. So we have to invest in things that look like they're going to get jobs. And it's a kind of a mean way to say, not a nice way to say things, but that's just the rules. And so in order for people to get jobs, their resume has to look a certain way. So you're going to learn how the most sophisticated readers of resumes review them. They often are rejecting you for reasons that might not even be conscious, but they know that certain things aren't good. A person can look at your resume and they can literally say, I like this person or I don't like this person. So there's ways to do that. And so you don't want to be someone to put yourself on the side of not being liked. And the resume is an application. It tells people how you're going to fit in, usually, what's important to you, how you write, how you organize information, how you choose to portray yourself, like the type of person, if you're capable of doing the work that they have, if you have the right experience, if you're focused enough. All these things have so much to do with your resume. And every employer expects you basically to come in and work hard and do your best. And incredibly, many resumes, a strong percentage of them, like over 25%, don't necessarily communicate the type of reliability, competence, and the fact that you may be dedicated to your practice area and want to work hard. Your resume needs to come off very quickly and show that you can do the job immediately that they have. There's one point, and I'm going to go into a little bit of detail, and I may do so right now. Give me 1 second, about some of the kind of the ways that, let me just see here. Just the thing that's interesting to me. Give me 1 second. Let's see here. Try to make this a little larger because I'm looking at another PDF here. Let me just see here. Yeah, I'll review this later in the presentation. But in general, I'll probably I have a document that I want to send out to everybody about this, about your resumes. But one of the most important things of resumes, and that a lot of people don't do, and if you remember one thing from this presentation, and again, I'm going to go into a great amount of detail on this because it's so important. But if you remember one thing from this presentation, you have to remember one thing. You have to remember that if you're applying for a job in a law firm, almost every time that you're applying for that job, if the law firm has a job, they're asking for someone to do something. It could be a personal injury attorney representing whoever. It could be a real estate attorney doing commercial transactions or leasing. If your resume talks only about that practice area and only looks like that practice area, and you de-emphasize things that have nothing to do with that practice area, and someone looks at your resume and they think this is a commercial transactions real estate attorney, and you don't list organizations on your resume that have nothing to do with that, you dumb down your previous experience and don't talk about previous experience that has nothing to do with that. You don't talk about the fact that you worked on some civil rights law journal in law school, and then you worked on immigration clerkships in law school. You don't touch, and then you worked some job that has nothing to do with it when you got out of law school. If your resume only talks about real estate transactions, and someone's going to look at that and they're going to think this is a real estate transactional attorney. And they're going to look at all these other resumes that have all this other garbage on it. And they're going to look at you and they're going to think this is the best resume. This person, that's what they do. It's a no-brainer. But most resumes don't do that. It's the same thing if a client's looking for someone. If a client's looking for a real estate transactional attorney to work to do real estate transactions for them, and your firm bio talks about how you do personal injury and you had all these previous jobs that had nothing to do with it. And not only that, but you're on some side of some political issue, like you support Palestine, you support Zionism, and you make your resume seem like that, and then people are going to be turned off, and it's not going to help you, and you're not going to look like an expert in something, and so you're going to not get as many clients, and you're not going to get as many jobs. It's going to hold you back. So just remember, someone needs to look at your resume and think practice area. That's really all you want them to think. You can think where you went to school and some other things and the quality of your firm, but they want to think practice area. And so just remember that anything on your resume that has nothing to do with your practice area isn't good. Anything that emphasizes mediocrity, like saying you were on the dean's list 2 semesters out of 6 in law school, or you finished in the top 50% of your class, or you got the best grade in the constitutional law in your class when you're trying to be a corporate attorney. None of that, you have to take that stuff off. You have to look like a focused machine doing one thing. If you do that, and just remember that, everything I'm going to talk about today, you're going to get a lot more jobs. Everybody does. The resume message is simple. You need to show that you're ready and capable of doing whatever work that they have. That's it. And it applies laterally where you're applying for jobs laterally out of law school. If you're in law school and you don't look like you want to be an attorney, or you want to do something else because of everything you're listing on your resume, or you don't want to work in a certain type of firm, then that's not going to help you. The way to take a look at your resume, you can do this with any AI program, and you can say, make my resume look like a commercial litigation attorney and remove stuff that's not relevant to that. Make my resume look like a patent attorney. Remove whatever the practice area is. Remove stuff that's not relevant. In most cases, all you'll need to do is say where you went to law school and college. And you don't need to have a lot of details about that. In most cases, you don't need to talk in any detail about whatever your summer jobs were and what you did if it's not related to what you're doing. In most cases, you don't need to even talk about in any detail your previous positions if it's not in the practice area. So most resumes are cluttered. That's 85% of all resumes are people are undermarketing themselves by not doing the correct things. The resumes are a mess. It's hurting them. And people that don't have cluttered resumes are getting jobs. And again, it's like the law of survival of the fittest. People that end up in the largest law firms typically do not have these inflated resumes with all this stuff. And the strongest resume is clear, it's focused, and disciplined. So if you're briefing, and people learn how to brief appellate briefs in law school, they learn how to, if you're briefing an appellate brief and you start talking about 15 things that have nothing to do with what you're appealing and the limited amount of space that you have to write something, then that's not going to help you. Your message is going to get lost in a bunch of garbage. So people learn this with briefing things in law school. Litigators learn that you only have, if you have 10 pages or 5 pages for some sort of reply brief, you don't talk about a bunch of stuff that's going to mislead the judge and having nothing to do with what your case is. So everything has to be clear, focused, and disciplined. And this is what attorneys learn in law school. This is what good attorneys do when they're practicing. They don't do things that have nothing to do with what they're trying to achieve. So why would you do that on your resume? You don't also want to stand out. So standing out means you look like someone that doesn't want to work for other people. Because in reality, you are just, when you're working for other people, you're a product, or you're a mini business if you're a partner to generate, to either do work for people or to bring in work. So most attorneys, a lot of attorneys want to stand out. And if you stand out with all, so if you try to stand out too much, then you're going to look like someone who's very difficult to manage. And so people that try to stand out will often leave if they don't receive praise. People that try to stand out are very opinionated, will often turn against the firm for random things, just that can't be anticipated, but they usually do it wherever they go. They may want a lot of attention. And if they have another opportunity appears, they often will leave. So you have to learn, and I'm talking here about large law firms, but in reality, it applies to all law firms. It applies to all of them. And if you're in a law firm and you're working for other people, one of the most important points you can also understand is anybody that's giving you work, like regardless if it's a client or any employer, that person's the client. And so if you're working for a client, their needs take precedent over yours. You obviously need to get paid by both of them, but their needs in terms of what they need done are more important than what you want done. You're there to work for someone and get paid, or you're there to learn your practice area in a law firm and get paid. You're there to do what someone else needs you to do, and that's it. And the quieter you are about it, the easier you are to work with, the better. So if you're in a law firm, you have to be selfless. You need to let partners, associates, and others take credit for your work. I couldn't believe it. I was in the Los Angeles office of a major New York law firm, one of the top law firms and 5 or 10 most prestigious law firms in the country. And I was working there. And as a third-year associate, I started bringing in all these clients. They were They all mushroomed. I got one big kind of startup client in Silicon Valley, and another one, he referred someone to me. And then anyway, so I started getting all this business, and I was bringing in clients, I don't know, every 3 to 4 weeks. And I couldn't believe it. I was sitting there, and someone that was an administrative role in the firm, like a chief operating officer, was sending out these emails saying this person brought in another client. They brought in their second client. They brought in their fourth client in 3 months. Like this great client, they're really, and I couldn't believe it because these were my clients, and there was a partner that was assigned to supervise me working on my clients, and they were doing that, but I had to let this person take credit for my work. That's just how it works. But I would take credit for my clients. And I see attorneys leaving firms all the time because they bring in a little client and they don't feel like they don't get credit for it. So others need to take credit for your work. If you come up with really good theories and help win cases and in a firm, you do something amazing, people will take credit for your work. I worked on a major US law firm. I worked on this incredibly involved thing with Philippines trying to get $550 million. It was frozen, and there were Swiss banks involved, and U.S. law, and then there was Philippine. And I worked on this thing and came up with this incredible. It's very hard. I worked for one time. I went into work on a Thursday and worked and came home on a Sunday morning, but I worked on this, and then I did a great job. And then someone else, a senior associate, took credit for my work. And then not only that, but then they made that person partner. And when they made him partner, they talked about all this incredible work you've done on this project. But that's just how it works. You let others take credit for your work. You need to work hard without expecting a lot of encouragement. And you need to work for a team. You're on a team, and you're not just working for your own self-interest. And it may often appear like there's no immediate benefit. There are associates that work 3,000 hours, and there are ones that work 1,800 hours. And they often are compensated the exact same, but that's it. You do that. And then you need to be able, law firms want people that are going to stay there through thick and thin and not leave at the first signs of trouble. Two of the best hires I ever made, I'll just tell you how this works, because in my business, which is recruiting, I would hire, when I started in the business, I thought that the most important thing was to hire people that had experience in large law firms and that went to great law schools because they could bond with my candidates, et cetera. But I discovered something much different. So I would hire people, like they would send their resume to BCG. I would see they were unemployed with these big firms. And then I would talk to them. And usually they've been fired probably most of the time. And I would hire them. And then those people typically would show up at the firm or my firm within a couple months after learning the basics of recruiting. They would start creating problems, and often they would leave, they would become competitive with me, they would insult me, they would try to turn other people against me, like all of these in the company, or they just, whatever, they were problem people. But at the same time, I remember I hired two people, and one of the people had been at her previous firm for 14 years, and the other had been there for 8 years. And to make a long story short, the one that had been there for 14 years stayed with me for 17 years, and the one that was there for 8 years stayed with me for 12 years. They were just people that just got along and figured everything out and didn't allow others to sway them one way or another when things got difficult, and did well. And so that's how people are. So there are people law firms can hire that are trouble. And there are people, and you can tell by their resume, usually by all sorts of moves and different things. And law firms want to hire people that are stable. There are certain law firms, I won't name them, but if you've been at more than 3 firms, or 2 firms in 2 years or 4 years, or 3 firms in 5 years, they will not even touch you. I know some firms that really top firms, and they just, in the entire history of this company, there's never anybody like that. So people want to hire people that are likely to stick around. So here's some items that you can, for kind of a quick fix here, you can remove from your resume to do much better. So a lot of times people will put all sorts of unnecessary or even polarizing information on their resumes. I saw a resume, and I was talking to him, like literally the reason I was late for this, a few minutes for this webinar. So I was talking to this guy, and he had all this stuff about his college fraternity. He was 25 years out of law school. And I don't know really why that was there. So when you're looking for jobs, a lot of times people think it's their qualifications. They think it's the job market, things are bad. And this is so crazy to me because it's not the job market. It's not in any practice area. It's still going on despite whatever's going on in the economy. But the problems are not the job market. It's the person's resume and what's on there. So your problem, there's always jobs for attorneys. It's not going out of style. It's going to continue, but people have bad resumes. And so the resume gives people reasons and firms for reasons not to hire them. And so you have to think about your resume. Is there anything on there that could create bias and makes it look like you're on the side of something rather than something that other people aren't going to like, or anything that confuses people? Like you don't talk enough about your experience, and it's just what's important to you. I review resumes every day, and I probably have examples literally from every single resume that I've ever reviewed, but I have multiple examples each day. I saw one resume yesterday of a woman that had been at 3 law firms. For her current law firm, where she'd been for 4 years, she had 3 sentences about her experience. And then her previous law firm, she'd been there, I don't know, like 6 years. And she had, or no, 6 years, 2 years. So 2 versus 4, 1 or 2 years, or maybe it's even 1. And she had 5 or 6 sentences. And then she started talking about some summer job she had and had 8 sentences. People just emphasizing things that, and they were all in different, emphasizing things, not overemphasizing current experience. It's crazy. Your resume needs to be focused. It needs to show that you're ready and capable in the practice area. And the law firm needs to look at you and think, I like this person because of one way or another. And they need to not be detracted from the fact that you are essentially, and again, I hate to say this, but you are a machine that they can plug in to do work, and that's what will happen. So if you look like a machine that could do one thing, that's what you would want. Just put yourself in the shoes of anybody hiring you. If a client's hiring you, they want a machine that's going to do the absolute best for them and whatever their legal issues are. If a law firm's hiring you, they don't want someone with all these personal opinions that's difficult to work with, that may want to do something else with mixed experience. The same thing with the client, mixed experience in the practice area, whatever they need. They want someone that's focused. You would too. If you wanted to hire anybody to work for you, say you want to hire a gardener, and the gardener provided you their resume and it talked about all these things that had nothing to do with gardening and their experience trimming trees and everything. It talked about their political affiliations, the other jobs they'd had prior to being a gardener. You would look at that like that they worked in telecom sales, that they like to write books. You wouldn't care. You only need someone to be a gardener. You would just think this is bizarre. And the same thing happens with attorneys. They have resumes that do exactly that. Think about it. If you're hiring a gardener, what do you care about? You care about they can trim bushes. They're expert in fertilizing lawns. They know how to raise roses. You care about those things. You don't care about anything that has nothing to do with the job and that you have. And just think about that. Take a look at your resume through the eyes of others and potential clients. And is it giving people what they need? Do you look like someone that's soliciting a client to do something or not? So here's some things that people do. And this is just an example, but I've seen resumes that of people talk about being an avid outdoorsman or hunter. And that might be okay, like in certain parts of North Carolina and Virginia and different places, but it can bother, stuff like that can bother people. It basically says you like killing animals in your spare time. So you're going to really upset vegetarians. You're going to people are going to associate you with a different type of friends and lifestyle and things. And so that's probably not a good idea to put stuff like that in your resume. Why would you do that? People do it. It could be avid outdoorsman. It could be anything that does that. But this is just a perfect example. Think about that. Just think about, is that something that people are going to want to see? People will list their religious affiliations. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But people are different religions. In certain cities, there's more people of certain religions than others. People will often hire people that are similar to them religiously. Some people are atheist. Some people, you have to be careful. I had one guy, I shouldn't even bring this up, but I had one guy that had all this stuff, but was trying to find a job in New York City after 9/11, and he had all this stuff about being a Muslim on his resume and didn't get any interviews. No one was hiring him, couldn't figure out what was going on. And there's nothing wrong with being any religion. But broadcasting on your resume, in this guy's particular case, hurt him. Broadcasting your religion, certain religions in different parts of the country is not going to help you. There's people of different religions that people don't like. And so you have to, or certain groups of people don't like certain people from other things. So you need to be very careful with all of this. And law firms will contain people from different backgrounds. Sometimes they may respond positively to it. Other times they won't. Just as a kind of a heads up, I do not see a lot of people in New York City advertising Christian religions or anything on their resume. It's just in different parts of the country that works. You see it in different states, but I don't see people advertising that they're Jewish, for example, in Utah. It's just people just have your resume. And again, I'm not saying that those people are prejudiced. I'm just saying that there's certain things that work in different markets than others. And just having that stuff off of your resume not on your resume can polarize certain people or make certain people like you and others not feel like you, because people are social animals and go towards different types of groups and all sorts of things. Certain people, Mormons, I've seen different parts of the country look at that. I mean, you have to be careful. They didn't used to allow Blacks and gays. People have prejudice. So any church can provide that. Any religion can upset people and run things the wrong way. And you're just better off leaving it off there. Why would you? And when you start looking at this, I remember when I was in college and I wanted work very hard and I wanted to make sure that I just got all A's. And it was difficult to do because I went to University of Chicago. And back then, I think we're talking about a long time ago, decades. The average grade point out of there was like a 2.7 or something. And I wanted to get the best grades possible. And I would go to the professors and I would go multiple times trying to improve papers. And eventually this one very smart guy said to me, a professor, he said, when you write a paper, you don't want to see comments on it that are criticizing your punctuation, but you also don't want to see comments that are questioning your logic or saying you're wrong, or you missed something. Like the best papers, I read it and there's no comments. And at the end, they say, great presentation. I really agree. You'd like to, no disagreements and just flat. And then you get an A. That's kind of sick. But if someone can find problems with it, every time they find a problem, then it kind of goes down in their mind that maybe this isn't that great. Same thing with law school exams, all that time. So the more problems people can find with something, the better. The other thing I learned, which is very interesting, and again, this is very true, is you take a class from a professor and they've already made up their mind about what certain things mean. They will often look through things in a very liberal way or a conservative way. And if you start telling a conservative professor liberal stuff, you're not going to get the best grade usually. And if you tell a liberal professor all the liberal stuff that they like, then you'll probably get a good grade. It's the same thing with resumes. Like you can certainly go on one side of something, but you have to be very careful. People will often list their marital status. This isn't that often anymore. People used to do it more. But you don't need to list that kind of information on there. So it's just, this isn't one of the biggest ones. So I'm not going to go into too much detail because most people now understand not to list that, but you really need to be focused on your professional qualifications. The other thing that you have to be careful about, you list your email on there. Your email should be just your name, 76 or whatever. People will have weird email addresses that talk about different things and put them on one side of something or another. You have to look at what is a conservative email address. So just anything like that, just take off your resume. People will use their work email address. I see that all the time. So again, if I look at resumes every day, and when I look at resumes, people will often list as their primary work email address, their work email. I was at a law firm, again, this big New York law firm that eventually went out of business, but I was at this law firm and there was a managing partner of the office. And one day I walked into his office and was talking to him and he had a big stack of papers. The stack of papers was at least a foot high in his desk. And I realized when I was sitting there that because he had all these emails and then all this documents, he had a shredder next to him. And I realized what he was doing is he was just reviewing emails to make sure if there's anything weird in there. And then I've also in staff inside of HR, what do you call it? Departments will review emails. I've had law firms, it happens often, where I may be trying to solicit a candidate and for a certain job, and I will email them at work. It's the only email I have, and it's not, I'm a recruiter, so I can contact them. It's not anything unethical or anything. And the firm will say, hey, we don't appreciate you recruiting our attorneys. So people review emails. And so you never put your work email address on there. The second you do that, the law firm can know if you're applying for a job. You also don't put personal emails there. Everything about your work email is all business. So if you do that, it's a huge mistake. It's also shows the people that are reviewing your resume that you're stupid. So you don't want to do that. And not stupid, but you don't have good judgment and discretion and that sort of thing. So you don't do that. And other people will list their email addresses from prominent law schools. So people that go to Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and so forth, they're always proud about where they went to school. And there's nothing wrong with that. But just keep in mind that the majority of people in almost every law firm didn't go to Princeton or Chicago or whatever it is. They probably didn't go to schools like that. And so because they didn't go to schools like that, when they see resumes like that, emails like that, it doesn't necessarily make them feel that good. Again, there's nothing wrong with it, but the school you went to shouldn't be the top achievement in your life. You should be worrying about your resume in other ways. People don't like that. Your education's already in your resume. They know that, so you don't need to draw attention to your school and tell everyone you give your email address to where you went to college or law school. People literally will do this. I don't quite understand why. The other thing, this isn't that common, but people will list private high schools. If they went to Exeter, Andover, almost anybody that goes to Exeter, Andover, one of these very prestigious schools, I think a lot of them will list that on their resume. It's very impressive, but it probably doesn't need to go on there to signal that your parents could pay $100,000 a year to send you to a school. And most attorneys went to public high schools and resent maybe that they didn't have that opportunity. And the other thing I don't like, and that can hurt you, and I want to be very careful here because I don't want to get in trouble, but people will list all these organizations on their resume that have nothing to do with anything. So sometimes people will list Mensa, which is funny. And Mensa, for example, you have to have a certain IQ, but the people that list that often will, I don't even know, I think it's self-reported. I don't even know how it works, but you take a test or something, but they often don't go to the best law schools. So we're like, why is someone super high? So you don't list things like that. You're assumed to be intelligent. And so people shouldn't list that sort of thing. When I talk about these organizations too, again, like I said, I want to be careful. And I may be talking a little bit about this in the rest of this webinar, but people will list organizations that have to do with race, their sexual orientation, their things like that. And I'm not trying to, like I talked about religion, I'm not trying to tell you whatever you need to do, you need to do. But what I can tell you is I don't think that's going to help you because people will take that as signaling that you should be hired because of this diversity or whatever you want to call it. They don't like that often. People will take that, and some people don't like people with certain backgrounds. So it's not a good idea to necessarily advertise it. Yeah, people that do that get most often fewer interviews than ones who don't. I've seen this time and time again. I've had multiple instances throughout my career where I was representing two people with law schools, very similar type of firms they were going to, very similar. One person listed all this stuff on their resume, the other did. And the one that listed the stuff didn't get interviews. The one that didn't list the stuff got lots of interviews or more interviews. So it can hurt you. And so you have to be very careful. I know you may think it's important that you are a member of certain organizations and to your identity is personal to you. It's not necessarily something that the law firm needs. Now, law firms do need diversity and they do advertise diversity and they do pick up on these things, but you can worry about that when you get hired. I don't think it's important to do that later. Personal blogs really aren't that big of a deal, but you have to be careful about that. One other thing I would just say is, and it's not really talked about in this presentation, but your social media related stuff, I've seen tons of attorneys, like several, it happens pretty regularly. If you have stuff on your social media account, like your Instagram, you're taking pictures of yourself on jets or whatever, that's not a good idea. Your Instagram things should be private. Your social media that's advertising things that you do or your political opinions, if they're very strong, law firms will review it. And when they review it, they'll think, how does this make this attorney look to our clients? And clients want a certain type of person generally, which is who's putting their interests first, and they may not want you on the side of certain issues as well. So you need to be careful about that. Like your social media things need to be you need to think about that. I see some of the dumbest stuff I can imagine. Again, I see this stuff every day. I saw one woman, I was talking to her yesterday, and she relocated to Cincinnati from Tampa, Florida, and was living in Cincinnati and working remotely for this firm in Florida. And she was trying to get a job in Cincinnati. And before she talked to me, she'd been applying for months to firms and not getting a lot of traction. And incredibly, she had the Florida address still listed on her resume and the Florida firm. So people are looking at her like, who wants to work in Cincinnati when they're living in Tampa? We want to hire people from here. So you have to be careful about listing addresses. I also don't like addresses because anybody can go to Instant Street View and take a look at your house. And do they like it? Do they look up? Is it too big? There's resumes or the address is often not the best idea. Now it's okay if you're trying to relocate somewhere, but address doesn't really help you. And in Los Angeles, there's from different parts of LA, it could be an hour and a half in each way. And people don't, and if it looks like you have a long commute, people want to hire people that are closer in, even if it's perfectly remote. So you have to be careful about your address, because if you're not close to the office or within a reasonable driving distance, it's pretty clear that if you need to, if there's a job closer that it doesn't require you to sit in a car an hour and a half a day, you're probably going to take that. So you have to be careful about the address even on your resume. People will list things these are just examples. These are not best examples, but people will often list things like about their travels and extended time taking trips and time off, sabbaticals, and law firms don't like that. It can hurt them. I had one guy in Texas pretty recently, like in the past couple of years, and he was looking for a position, and he'd taken a year off after coming out of an extremely demanding law firm, and he'd taken a year off to do a sabbatical and travel and stuff, and wrote on his resume that he'd taken a year-long trip and listed all the countries and things, and wasn't getting any interviews. And that's, again, if you're a large law firm and you see someone, or any law firm, that you're going to question their commitment to working for you. So why would you do that? Or staying in one place? And again, most people, this is just a kind of a heads up. Most people that leave and do something like that are not that committed. And when they go back to a law firm, they will leave if they're hired. You have to be careful about that. So your resume needs to be focused on your education, your legal experience, and someone that really wants to do this practice area, whatever you're doing. And the better it does working in a law firm, the better it does that, the better. So this is the big one, the next one. So I've talked about getting this personal stuff off your resume and why that's going to help you. And so that's a big one. I think you can clean that up very easily. You can even take your resume and post and enter it into some AI program and say, remove everything that doesn't look related to my practice area or whatever, and it looks too personal. Then there's prompts and stuff. I could probably give you one. But then you need to remove also your relevant work experience and also anything related to your education that's also relevant. So most things unrelated to the practice of law need to come off, and they can hurt your chances. And people are looking for resumes that have focus, that are focused on your experience and not something else. I told you earlier that the resume needs to give the impression and look like that when you look at it, it just looks and it smells like this practice area. And so it's often called like the scent test. And so the scent test means that you look at it and all you get is a scent of someone that's good at this practice area and wants to do it. Anything. And imagine a bloodhound has 15 different, let's just say there's 15 bodies, but there's, 15 different things, some that are, and it's going to go after the one that gives it the clearest scent of whatever it's looking for. And so same thing with a resume. Employers will hire people that do that, but you have to think very cognizant of, do I look like this type of attorney and only that type of attorney, or is there anything on my resume that doesn't talk about that? So here's some things that people do. So sometimes people will, and this is common. If I look at resumes each week, I'll usually see a couple of these. People will leave law firms and start businesses, and they'll put it on their resume. They'll say, "Oh, I started this app, or I did this," and then it's pretty clear that they failed at it. And so, why are you putting some business on your resume that you might have failed at? And why are you telling people that that you could potentially get, if a good business idea presents itself, you're going to get up and leave? And you have to also think, here's another quick important point. And again, I hope you are writing some of this stuff down. I'll send you the PowerPoint I was done. But if an employer has a job, like, they have to choosing someone that's currently with a law firm, that has stability, that's motivated to work in a law firm, that hasn't left, that is doing that practice area. Or why would they hire you if you have something on your resume that talks about you traveling or starting in a business? Like, why would they hire you instead of the person who looks focused? So anything that detracts from someone hiring you, you may be very proud of these things, but at the same time, that doesn't really do it for law firms. Anything that shows that you'll leave for a better opportunity, that doing something else, you may not want to do this. Basically, the law firm will conclude that if you come back there, you're going to probably another escape. And law firms do not want to hire people that look like they'll leave. Why? Because then they have to hire new people to do the work, and they don't like that. That's a lot of lost money. The clients aren't getting work done. They don't look good to their clients. All these things that undermines the morale of people when people leave, because you may go talk badly about the firm on your way out. Or people may think that, man, this doesn't work for me working in this law firm like this. I'd rather be doing something else like this person. They seem happier. Just, you don't want to do that. And people that are entrepreneurial, by the way, most entrepreneurs, like serious entrepreneurs, like people that have, like, not serious, but a history of that in their background, almost always leave law firms. They either leave law firms to start their own business, or they just are people that don't like working for other people. And so that's it. So why would you put anything on your resume that talks about that? Many attorneys will be solo practitioners and want to go back to law firms. Often they won't have enough work, so they want to do that. Solo practitioner, again, there's nothing wrong with being a solo practitioner, but if you're a solo practitioner, you're making your own rules, you're not accountable to others, you may not have good training, and things like that. And again, I'm not telling you not to become a solo practitioner, you do extremely well, but anything that looks like you don't want to work with a group of people and contribute as basically a worker ant, I'm not trying to be very clear here, is suspect. I will tell you another thing that's extremely interesting. So I talk to partners regularly, and I know lots of them, and talk to that have huge books of business. They have books of business of 10 million, 20 million, these 30 million, huge books of business. But these people, when I talk to them, they're like, this is what my clients think. This is what the firm thinks. This is what my partners expect me to do. This is how the firm evaluates. They talk in terms of this team. You would think that people that are making 7 million, 8 million, 10 million, $10 million a year would be people that are like all out for themselves. But no, they talk in terms of their team. So all this stuff, that you have to look at a team player, and people don't like it when you don't appear like a team player, because when you join most law firms, you're there to be part of a team. So you have to really think about that, and very important, not looking entrepreneurial, looking like a team. And so this is just important. Same thing with your prior to going to law school. People that operate businesses prior to going to law school are often not the greatest risk for attorneys. Most attorneys do not have entrepreneurial backgrounds. It's just the way it is. And some of them do and become very successful, but they usually become successful with their own firms. And so the entrepreneurial background is not typically what the average attorney is. They come out of a different type of background. And so because of that, law firms will view them as risks. So if you want to work for other people, you need to dumb this stuff down. Now, I'm not saying, by the way, that there's anything wrong with you being any of these things. There's nothing wrong with you wanting to act.
Oh, so what? Hold on. I don't know what just happened here. This is very strange. Wait 1 second.
Hold on. Wow. Give me 1 second. I'm not sure what just happened. Oh, here we go. Okay. Very odd. Hold on. Okay. Let me make sure I got my camera back there. That was pretty funny. Fix that. Okay, hold on. My camera fell. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you being an entrepreneur. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you being a Democrat or Republican or socialist or communist. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with your race, your religion. That all can work for you. There's nothing wrong with any of these things. The problem is when you try to work for people that may not like those sorts of things. And so that can create problems. So you can build a whole career based on serving certain ethnic groups or based on serving people from certain religions. But it's often not the smartest thing to do that to try to advertise this stuff on your resume. And the same thing with entrepreneurs. There's nothing wrong with being an entrepreneur. These are good things. But the problem arises when you're trying to work for other people. And your goal, really, the first 5 years of practice is just to have someone train you in something. And you get paid to do it. And once you're trained, you can open your firm, you can do whatever you want, you can do another job, you can go in house, but you need to keep that stuff. You want to look like a soldier instead of a general. And the difference between a soldier and a general, this is again another very important point. A soldier, you tell a soldier, take this gun and go run into battle and you get killed. And soldiers are like, okay, that's what they do. But if you're a general, you're telling people what to do. You have opinions, you're coming up with strategy and things. And most attorneys have to be soldiers. They have to be soldiers for the people that they work for, and they're giving them work. And then they can be generals if they start their own firms and things. But you have to think in terms of soldiers and generals. Do you look like more like a soldier than a general? Other people will put different things on their resume that don't look like they're necessarily committed to working in a law firm. People will put in extra credentials, courses they took to make it look like they did something else. For certificates, that doesn't help you. They just want to see a focus on a practice. Anytime you put things on your resume that don't look like you want to do something, or you might want to do something else, firms, that it's not good. So you might put, you got a certificate from Harvard Business School in entertainment law, and meanwhile, you're personal injury attorney in a firm. So anytime you look like you may want to do something else, people will doubt your long-term commitment to being an attorney. So you have things on there that are relevant. If you are a privacy attorney, you can have all sorts of courses and things. If you're a tax attorney, having taken outside classes in tax and things can help you. But anything that looks like you might want to do something else needs to come off. Sometimes people will have a lot of emphasis on their undergraduate experience. They'll talk about all these associations they were in and all these different things that they did. And those things you only pretty much want to leave things that strengthen your professional image and make you look strong. Things that I do is when people are taking in different sports and things, people like that. But people don't like when you're putting on things that, again, some people could react negatively to. Sports are good because it's about teamwork, but different groups and things that could be polarizing. It's the same thing like I talked about earlier. People do not want things to do with your identity, religious, political, ideological. They just want that off. And you look better when you take it off. People are like that. They respect it. And so putting these materials on there, other things are important. The other thing that you need to worry about are jobs before law school. So a lot of times people have had careers doing different things, and they'll put a lot of emphasis on that. I saw a resume, again, I do this every day. Every day I see things. I saw a resume yesterday where a woman was talking about the fact that she'd been a legal secretary prior to going to law school. And she had more detail about her job as a legal secretary, which was 10 plus years ago, than she had over her 5+ years of experience as an attorney. There's nothing wrong being a legal secretary. It's actually good. Paralegals, legal secretaries, and things that people did before law school are good. But sometimes people will have jobs that don't have really much to do with that at all. And if that's the case, you're often just better off saying the year you graduated from college, the year you graduated from law school, and then starting right off with a legal job you had. Now, there's certain jobs that are very respected, like you were able to get a position, working at Goldman Sachs or something like that would probably be interesting to include on there, but most jobs are not. So you try to keep that off. Accounting firms, different things can help you, but you need to be careful. Does my pre-law school experience, does that look like something that's going to help my current experience and make me look strong? So you need to think about that. And less serious jobs, things like People will put being a waiter, nanny, or unrelated short-term work and often distract from your legal qualifications. I'm not always right about this, by the way, what I'm saying, but in general, I am. I had a woman that had a resume that I didn't think was very good. And she had on her resume that she had opened and run a restaurant. And I remember a law firm hired her because they were so excited about this background. But in general, maybe that presents her as a high performer, but I didn't think she was a good risk for that law firm and shouldn't have been hired, but she was. And anyway, so yeah, other things, working in the military is often, even though that can be polarizing, sometimes people will put that on their resume. And again, other people don't like the military. You want to try to support your current background, you're working in a law firm. The other thing that's interesting is people will often put the fact that they have taken other bars. So I'll see people sometimes that are in like New York, and they'll put on their resume when they're applying for jobs in New York, Florida bar admission pending, or California bar admission pending, or things that are out of state that make it look like maybe they want to work in another state. And so they put that on there, and people are like, why is that there? And people are proud of it, but it signals to whoever's interviewing them that are looking at the resume, they want to work somewhere else. Or they graduate from, they're working in, I don't know, they're working in California or something, and they put on that they're admitted to the Texas bar and they've never worked in Texas. People are like, why are they doing that? They must want to relocate there. So you have to be careful. It doesn't help you to list these bars many times if you're not planning on working in one of those states. So if you're trying to work in a certain state, again, if you worked in Florida and now you're working in California, like listing Florida on there is fine, but people will often wonder why that's there. So you want to always think about your resume. Does this support the job that I'm applying to? And yeah, and again, this is not always the case, and I had a candidate recently that had Kansas, I think, on his resume, Missouri or something, and a law firm was interviewing him that actually had clients there and liked that he was, but it was a smaller law firm. And that's something like that's probably, sometimes it's okay, but in general, you don't want to list things like that. Sometimes people list parenting roles between gaps in their experience. That's not always the best idea. You have to be careful about that. I do want to bring up a quick point. And again, I'm trying to go into as much detail as possible because I always see things from attorneys that hurt them. I keep running into these examples over and over of men that take paternity leave from law firms and then they end up losing their job when they come back. So I don't know what it is. And the opposite happens with women. They're always welcome back. But men that do this, it seems to really hurt them, or they come back and no one gives them work, or sometimes they're on this paternity leave. And then when they are in the middle of the paternity leave, the firm tells them they don't have any work for them when they come back because things are slowed down. So you have to be careful about some of the stuff. It's actually very respected for women to take time off, and law firms are usually quite welcoming for that, but not always. You need to be careful. Other times people will draw attention to mediocrity. Like, why would you draw attention to mediocrity? So you don't list your class rank or GPA in your, unless it's extremely good. Law firms that are getting applicants from lots of people, they can hire from the very top of their class. They don't usually, not always, but why would you try to put down something that's mediocre in your resume? Like I talked about earlier, if you get a 3.0 and then that's top 50%, or these things can weaken your resume. So you do not want to do anything that draws attention to the fact that you're not among the top performers. Imagine trying to convince a client to allow you to handle some sort of litigation case and you say, I won 50% of the time. People don't want to hear that. And you wouldn't want to hear that from an attorney if someone was trying to represent you in a criminal case or something. I've gotten people off 50% of the time. You'd want to have the attorney that never lost. Law firms are the same way. Why would you do anything in your background and put anything in your resume that doesn't make you look the best possible? And I don't understand why attorneys do this as well, because you have the option when you're working on a resume to do something. You either look like a strong performer, the best performer possible, or you make yourself look mediocre. So if you're in any case where you're representing any transaction, but just think about a case. Anytime a good commercial litigator, good litigators on one side of an issue, their job always is to not even talk about the issues that are the weaknesses of their case. Now, they can talk about it, but they're not going to draw attention to it. They're certainly not going to draw attention to something the other side doesn't know. So you don't draw attention to mediocrity. You don't draw attention to things that you want to look exceptional. And if you can't look exceptional, you don't say anything. There's no reason. Why would you say something that doesn't make you look good? So people do that. They'll list that they got the highest grade in the class, like I said earlier. They'll list they were on the dean's list one semester. They'll even do it for their college. They'll list, I don't know, that they were 8th place in some moot court competition. No, you only draw attention. People want to hire the best people. They don't want to hire people that are average. And even though you could be incredibly proud of the fact that you were able to get a good grade in something or do something or in the top half of your class, that's not something that's going to move the needle for you in terms of you need to look like the strongest possible person that's ready for the highest level of possible legal work, that where there's no questions that this person is above average. Like, why would you say on your law firm website that you graduated in the top half of your class or got the highest grade in some class? You wouldn't do that, but people do that on their resume. Here's just some general rules. Top 10 law school, you can say you're in the top 20%, that's okay. Top 11 to 25, top 10%. When you start getting to second, third tier, and fourth, you need to be very careful about your class rank. And it's just, you just don't draw attention to that. So if you went to a third tier law school in the top 5%, you could, assuming whatever in your background, you could potentially get a job at one of the top law firms in the country. But you need to be, same thing with maybe in a third tier, fourth tier, but you only want to draw attention to important things. Sometimes people will, a lot of times, will list the most basic skills on their resume. Again, I don't understand why law attorneys aren't taught this. I don't know. There's some law schools, of course, that teach this, but most of them don't. A lot of them don't. And I can't say most. I don't want law schools to hate me. But people will list things on their resume that every attorney should know. They know Microsoft Word and Excel, or Excel is not as important, but they know Microsoft Word, or they're proficient in Westlaw, or the attorneys are expected to be able to analyze complex legal issues and not prove they can do basic things or use basic tools. Some examples are like people would write on their resume, they wrote memos. And again, you're assumed to know all these things. And if you're listing the most rudimentary skills that every attorney should have, then it's like you're grasping at straws to try to look like something or someone that has some sort of, you're just grasping at straws, and it doesn't make you look inexperienced and unsophisticated. And you should be able to highlight your strengths and not have basic competencies on there, because the best attorneys, by the way, never will list this sort of stuff. They won't have things that people are expected to have. The other thing that's very funny is a lot of times more senior attorneys will go to resume people that will help them redo the resume. And when people help them redo the resume, a lot of times what will happen is the resume service will list all these things on their kind of a box on their resume that talks about their skills and things. And we'll say stuff like strong advocate when the person's a litigator. Of course, they have to be an advocate. And just very basic things on there. So you don't put unnecessary skills. You don't put down that you analyze case law or you drafted transactional documents. If you're just the most basic things, so you don't put down generic skills. The best resumes often can just say corporate associate if it's at a major law firm, or corporate M&A associate. And you don't need to talk about a lot if people know what things are. People put, like I talked about earlier, individual course grades, totally unnecessary. And it draws attention away. Why didn't you get better grades in other classes? And so you take those out. The law school coursework that's unrelated. So I don't understand why people do this. So people will, again, grasping at straws, will be like list different courses that they took on their resume that may be completely unrelated to their practice area sometimes, or will be related, but people will ask themselves, why is this person listing these? So if you're a corporate attorney and saying you took corporate law in law school, that's probably not going to help you. But if you're a trust and estates attorney, you list all the trust and estates classes you took. That's interesting, can help. But you typically don't, a trust and estates attorney wouldn't want to list a class that they took about real estate or something, or constitutional law or contracts. You don't want to do things that make you look too weak. And just thinking about that in terms of what am I presenting for myself? Am I just kind of grasping at straws and trying to fill my resume with things that don't have much to do with it? Here's another big thing that people will do that I don't like, and that hurts them. People will be very proud of different academic papers that they've written, often completely unrelated to practicing law. Law firms, by the way, are not academic institutions. They are places where, and being a lawyer, where your strength is taking arguments and boiling them down to their essentials and whatever it is, and being focused and not going off in theoretical tangents and stuff. If you want to do that, you can certainly work in a law school and teach law, but that's not what attorneys do. People are not impressed with that, and it doesn't necessarily help you at all unless it's, and usually a lot of academic writing takes a position on something that could be that people may not want to hear. Also, yeah, a lot of times when I see, again, it happens every day. I was talking to someone about a resume just this morning, and they had all these papers about civil rights on there. And I was like, if you have that on your resume, people are going to think that if they piss you off, they're going to sue you or you're going to sue them. And he was like, yeah, you're right. Actually, I shouldn't have that. But thinking about that, and this person was a real estate attorney, and something that supports your practice area could help you, like a patent attorney writing about science, but generally not. It should just be, you want to look straightforward. You don't want to look like you're interested in something else. You want to look like you want to practice law. And again, looking like an academic hurts you. It doesn't help you. And I talk to law professors all the time that many went to top law schools, and I can't believe it. A lot of them don't, they're not focused. They just go off on these tangents about different things and not what the typical attorney does. Sometimes people will often talk about just routine duties that every person does. Like I told you, every corporate attorney drafts corporate documents, every patent attorney writes patents, every litigator writes briefs, memos, does discovery. Why would you talk about the fact you've done discovery on your resume when every single litigator does that? You just don't put that there. So people just, that would be like if you're a waiter listing that you waited on tables. No, everybody knows that. So you only include things that are interesting. So if you've done trials, appeals, like things like that's interesting, or you've done something very focused. Like I saw a guy yesterday or the day before that dealt with water damage in Florida, and was someone that sued insurance companies and things for water damage. It was very interesting. So his resume was focused on that, and that was interesting, all his different experience that, and that made him very marketable in that particular practice area, but not as much in Florida anymore because there's been some sort of tort reform or something. But it was a very interesting experience. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but I'm cognizant of everyone's time, but this is, again, in my opinion, an extremely important webinar for you, because if you stop making these mistakes, you'll do well, then much better. But a lot of times people will have distracting formatting. You should be using common fonts. Not everything should be formatted just so it doesn't stick out. So you're making use of your experience and using that. When you're briefing something for a court, the court doesn't allow you to use fancy colors and fonts and things. They require you to do things in a standardized way. When you're drafting legal documents for a transaction or something, you're not putting fancy colors and things on there. So the focus is on the legal work. And so the same thing with an attorney resume. It needs to focus on the legal work. It just needs to be easy to read. It doesn't stick out because of colors, and it doesn't stick out because of different highlighting, and it just needs to be very clear. Sometimes people will often do what's called keyword stuffing, and they will add certain colors and things to their resume, certain keywords that don't really make a lot of sense and that shouldn't be on there. So you need to be careful about that as well. And you need to have very clear, but it needs to look very clear, and you should be very direct with your language. And again, this is something that the best attorneys understand. And every time you work on your resume, by the way, anything you do with your resume, you're basically telling the employer the quality of attorney you are. And again, the quality of the attorney you are is based on, and this is the lesson in how to be a good attorney, which unfortunately it comes through because people are reading your resume to see what kind of attorney you are. So they're reading resumes to see how direct your arguments can be, but not that there's not irrelevant information on there, but they're also reviewing your resume to see how focused you are. If your attorneys are paid to reduce arguments to their essential arguments that are likely to win without a lot of detail, to be readable by judges. So when I was at Quinn Emanuel, I learned from some of the best, in my opinion, it was a small firm when I was there, like 40 attorneys, litigators in the country. People like to reach conclusions on their own. So they don't like to be told how to reach a conclusion or what something is. They want to reach conclusions on their own. So what does that mean? That means that when you're putting something on your resume, that the person reading it should reach conclusions on their own. You shouldn't tell them how to think. And because people feel better about something when they reach their own conclusion, if you're telling somebody how to think, then they resent that. I see a resume and the person's had, I don't know, 1 job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, whatever it is. The experience, the reader is going to reach a conclusion based on that. But if you tell the person how to think, like I'm a multidimensional thinker, my objective is this, I'm this kind of person that has experience negotiating on a boardrooms to working with people write the stuff. And these objectives and these summaries at the top of resumes are like all over the place. But the thing is, if you're doing this, if you're putting these objectives and things at the top of your resume or these summaries, you are basically saying to the law firm, the person reading it, you are an idiot. You cannot read my resume and just read and see the kind of attorney I am, what I've done. You have to be told what this means. And people don't like that. People want to understand what something means. And so people need to understand that. And if they understand what something means, then they're going to feel much better than that you let them read. Lawyers are trained to read things. They don't need to be told what something means. So people will do that. Don't do that. And people that do that, it doesn't help you. And most of the times it's senior attorneys and people that but other people do it too. The other thing that people will do is they will have these statements about references available on request. And no, of course references are available. Everybody is expected to have references, but people do that. Why would you put that on your resume? That you're assuming again that the law firm is an idiot. So of course references are available. That just makes it seem, why would you put that? Would they not be available? Are people assuming that they're not available? Do people that don't have references, don't put references available? So you take that off. Anything that wastes time, anything that draws attention away from your strengths, it doesn't belong there. Again, people will put this on the top of their resume. Things like I talked, these summaries again, Ivy educated corporate attorney, fearsome litigator things. Just no, they don't belong there. Allow people to read your conclusions and allow people to reach their own conclusions about what they're seeing. Just imagine if you were watching some sort of show about, some romance movie. And at the beginning of the movie, they started telling you like how you're going to feel, what this show means, what the conclusions you'll reach after watching it, and all these things. You'd be like, why in the hell are people doing this? If you're watching entertainment, you want to reach your own conclusions about things. If a person's reading a resume, they feel much better if they're doing that. Resumes should always be 1 page. There's really nothing that you can say that doesn't need to be on 1 page. You can literally take a 30-year career and make it 1 page. No one is going to spend a lot of attention on a resume longer than 1 page. It needs to communicate whatever it needs to do in 1 page. Now, you can, if you want, and it's actually a good idea, if you have a deal sheet or kind of a list of the types of cases you've worked on, you can do an extra page. I actually like that. I think corporate attorneys and transactional attorneys that do that, it's actually cool because it shows like how interested they are. Like it can give the breadth of their experience. And people that like what they're doing will write down and think, okay, this is who I am now, is building my experience, and they like that. So I like the transaction sheets. You can search for those on BCG and get those, but you always need to focus on what's important and just don't put things that 1 page is all you need. You don't need more than 1 page. And when you go to more than 1 page, you're showing law firm that you can't summarize your experience, that you don't know how to write directly, and you're creating problems. The other thing that people do, they will create a photograph, they'll put photographs on the resume. I'm not going to go too much into that. This is just basically for people that are from foreign countries trying to get jobs will often do that. Again, I talked about personal interests, keeping those off. So people will have at the end, they'll have a section often called interest or something along those lines. And then it'll be stuff like cooking, horseback riding, hobbies. You can put that there. but in general, it's does often will do more harm than good. So I'd recommend not putting that there. And people are reach conclusions about different people, so not worrying too much about that. So I typically remove that stuff from your resume. I'm talking about cooking, and it's just you're there to be an attorney. You wouldn't do that in your law firm bio. So if it's not in your law firm bio, then it probably shouldn't go there. So think, what would a law firm put about me on my bio? And that can often be anything that's not related to that. Law firms are very good at distilling people's experience and putting it on a law firm bio. You should think about it that way. And then other things that people will do is they'll just make mistakes with words and so forth. He or she can tell a lot about by the words you use. Here's some things that you shouldn't be doing. I saw one person yesterday. This was very funny. He was interviewing for and just gotten an offer from a big law firm, and not a huge law firm. I mean, a decent sized middle market law firm. And I was reading his resume. I read it like 3 or 4 times. And he had down that he was a president of an organization, and president was misspelled. I don't know how no one saw that. I didn't catch it, but I saw it after he got a job. People do things like that. So sometimes again, if you use language that's too complex, then that's not good. You need to take your resume and run it through AI programs and ask it to make things directly. If you can't, do it on your own, which any AI program will help you do that. You should not describe yourself with adjectives. You should allow people to reach conclusions. If you're detail-oriented, then your resume should be detail-oriented. If you're hardworking, your experience should say that. If you're an outside box thinker, you don't want to call yourself that. So you have to be careful with all this stuff. And then using too many words on your resume. Sometimes people want to say so much that they make the font smaller and things. And you don't need that. People don't care. If someone does a certain type of work, like they do a certain type of work most of the time, it's not, you don't need to go into a lot more detail. One thing that's interesting, I'll just throw this out there, large law firms typically prefer to hire associates from other large law firms. Why? Because those people from large law firms are trained to think a certain way and to approach problems a certain way. So if somebody is coming from one big law firm to another in a certain practice group, that attorney does not need to say a ton of stuff about their experience, because everybody knows that the work quality and stuff of one large law firm to another, or one really top boutique firm to another is. Testimonials are another issue that doesn't belong on a resume, so you need to remove those, or quotes, or what supervisor said. I talked a little bit about earlier, just spelling errors. Like every resume is a legal document. Attorneys don't make mistakes and are trained not to make mistakes, to have proper punctuation, to not make typos, to not use the wrong words. That's what an attorney does. And if an attorney is making mistakes, the problem with that is that what happens is, if you are turning in things to a court with typos and things, or you're turning in things to a client with typos, like no one can analyze the thought process between how you're reaching conclusions. And so if somebody is sloppy in their work product in terms of the way it looks, then an employer is going to think, hey, there's probably problems with the way that this person is reaching conclusions, meaning the legal analysis beneath this. If the person's not paying attention to how something's written, then the legal analysis is probably wrong too, because there's a lot of unspoken things that go into that. So you have to be very careful about that. And your spell checking and so forth is never going to catch every error, especially when using similar spelling words and things. So you need to be careful, and everything needs to be proofread. Sometimes people will only list years where they're at an employer. That can be an okay thing to do if you were only at a place for a portion of 1 year. But generally, legal employers will see that and they'll know you're trying to hide something and will ask about that. If you're at some place for a short period of time, it's up to you. And I'm not going to tell you, I'm not an ethics expert or anything like that, but sometimes people will have very short-term jobs, like 3 months or a month or something. And I talk to attorneys all the time that tell me that they've eliminated that from their resume. And often, do you want to draw attention to that sort of thing? So obscuring dates and things can be something that employers don't like. Short tenures at firms often aren't necessary. Sometimes people have been a contract attorney for 3 months. After being in a law firm, I don't see working for a contract agency isn't probably something that you need to put on your resume. It's not a permanent job. It's not like they're going to go back and check with the employer if you did good contract work or multiple employers or an agency. You just need to be careful about this stuff. The next one is just lying or exaggerating. I don't see that a ton, but I've seen people literally lie about the law school they went to. I saw someone do that once that I placed at a major US law firm. She'd gone to Fordham and she was not happy about that. And then when she applied to our company years later, even though I placed her, she listed that she went to Columbia. I was amazed. What happened? What happened there? The other thing that a lot of times people will do, especially young partners, they will exaggerate their business, not on the resume, but later, any type of misrepresentation can hurt you. Typically, law firms will go back if they don't like you for some reason or they want to fire you, and or they will double check things on your resume. And if those aren't accurate, then you can get fired. So sometimes people will say they got grades they didn't get, like grade point average or win different law review or whatever, and they put that on the resume. And if it's caught, you'll get in trouble. So you need to be careful about that. People will. Here's another big one. Again, I saw this yesterday. Just these examples just keep coming to mind over and over. People will do things like they'll list their dates of employment when they're not currently working someplace. And so they'll say they're at this firm or that. So present, every law firm will check the candidates, the website of the law firm that they're currently working at. Everyone does. So if you do that, law firms will always say, why isn't this person on the website? What is this? So your resume always needs to be honest and you can't admit things. And let me see what else I got here. So if they catch you lying about the stuff, they will fire you immediately. Not all will, but a lot of them will, because it destroys trust. And so it's not worth it. Certain things, I guess you get reported to the state bar. And I don't know if I've seen that quite often, but you need to be careful about it. I guess I haven't seen law firms report people to the state bar for things they've said in the resume. They may. So you should never lie about that. Sometimes people lie about their hours. You can't check that. They can't, but if it's expected, suspected, that'll create problems. Partners don't lie about business generally on their resume, but they do when they're trying to get hired. And then sometimes people will talk about their reasons for leaving a firm. That's probably not necessary. And then this is the final one, and then I'll wrap this up in a fairly long webinar, but it's important. People will often say things on their resume that are a little bit negative towards the previous employer. Just as you would never say anything negative about your employer in an interview, you also want to make sure that you don't do that anything or imply anything like that when you're talking about your employer on your resume. Years ago, my mother had a long position in state government and needed to find another position fairly quickly. She'd worked there for 2 decades and she wanted to do just something else. And she was in Detroit, which didn't have a lot of work back in the 1980s. And her background was really focused on just doing civil rights and art history. And she literally didn't get any interviews because she was seen as an advocate and someone that was an academic. And so she was trying to get different types of jobs and couldn't. And she concluded that her resume was the problem. She started focusing on the resume. She took a course in resumes, hired an expert, and spent hours, just on days and weeks, trying to perfect this resume. And this is what a lot of people do. And she kept getting bad advice and never really, I don't think, got to where she wanted to be. And finished resume is very long and overdone, had all these words. And so she took a look at this resume and just thought, oh, the whole problem's a resume. I need to say more and convince people more. And instead of helping her, it actually probably hurt her. It was bullets and pages of formatting and experience prior to her current job, just less focused, and then never ended up getting another position. And everything was wrong and overwritten. Think about this. Your resume, literally like hers, could be hurting your whole career. And your resume, you don't want it to take too much time for people to understand. You don't want to make that reader work. The reader just needs to look at it and within 5-10 seconds reach a conclusion. That's it. They don't want anything more. If there's too much more there, they're kind of going to start being a little mad that you're making them think so much and read so much, and they won't pay attention to it. I'll just tell you a mistake that I made, and this is actually changed the course of my life by fixing it. And it's an important lesson. So when I was in college at the University of Chicago, I became very interested in studying Detroit and the racial makeup and how things work there and how the cities have Detroit were the suburbs were all white, black, and when Detroit was all black and what was happening. And got so into it, I literally wrote a book when I was in, not something that was published, but a long book with 350 pages or whatever. And then the school liked it. I co-taught a class of undergraduate, graduate school students when I was senior Miss Bizarre. I was so into this stuff and I was very interested in it. So I wrote up lots of detail about this book and thing on my resume and this classes. And then I had an asphalt business that I've been operating since I was in high school that had grown, did a lot of, I was very proud of. And so I had this resume that just talked all about this stuff. And I would get interviews largely because of my grades. And I would go into these interviews and start talking about all this stuff. And people were like, I'm not going to call this person back. And so I got a summer associate job just by chance because I knew someone in a big law firm in New York. And then my best friend's mother had been best friends in college with the hiring partners. And so I was able to get a job. And then somehow I got a clerkship. But then when I got fired from my clerkship, I had this I didn't have a job and hadn't taken the bar exam because it was supposed to be a tier clerkship. And I got fired in the first year. And so I sat down and I had to figure out, what do I need to do with my resume? And I don't know, I thought about it for days and wrote notes and resume interviewing, all this sort of thing. And I realized that all people cared about was, they didn't care about any of this. They just cared about what was direct and what was made and just got the point across. And I think a lot of what I learned probably was from this clerkship, like working with a judge and getting input on how to write, seeing all these firms briefing things to the judge and writing opinions, and then helping him select people to interview. And so I realized that the best thing you can possibly do with a resume is to just make it focused and not talk about anything that's irrelevant. And so I did that. I removed things that had nothing to do with practicing law, that I was just very direct, talked about my law school, law review, college, honors, whatever, whatever was on there, and then talked about the law firm I worked in the summer, law firm the second summer or first summer, and didn't talk about papers, didn't, just very nothing hardly, except the jobs and titles, because everyone knows what a big law firm is. Everyone knows what clerkship does. And the resulting resume was like stripped down to hardly anything. And I knew that I had to do that when I went out to interviews too. So I sent this resume out. I'd never been to California. I decided to go there and sit in New York because I'd broken up with my fiance, and she actually called off the wedding when I got fired. So I decided I was going to apply to firms in California. I'd never been to California. It was like a foreign country as far as I was concerned. And 4-hour flight was similar to flying from New York to Europe. And so I had this experience to do this. And so I suddenly just got all these interviews that I normally wouldn't have. And I went in and got jobs. And so it's incredibly important. Had I not done that and come out led with this resume that talked about all these books and papers and unrelated experience, and people have been like, this guy wants to be a contractor. He doesn't want to be an attorney. Had I done that, I wouldn't have probably gotten hardly any interviews. Maybe I wouldn't have gotten another job as an attorney, at least not in California, much less even in the Detroit area. You have to strip everything down to its essentials. You can't detract the reader into something else. And people do not care about everything you've done in your past. They just want to know if you can show up to work and you're going to be dependable and you look like a decent attorney and you look like a team player that can work on a team and support people that are giving you work. And that's all you need to do. So the resume needs to be very simple. And so saying less and allowing people to reach conclusions on their own is often saying more. And so you really have to do that. And that if you make these changes, you're going to really just change the direction, the number of interviews you get, and also thinking about your career this way, because you're just going to be much, much better off. And everybody makes these mistakes. Senior attorneys that are in-house make these mistakes. Law students make these mistakes. Young attorneys make these mistakes. Mid-level attorneys, senior attorneys make these mistakes. And it's sad because you make these mistakes and it prevents you from getting positions you could otherwise get. So you apply to these jobs and you're like, why is no one interviewing me? Why am I having these problems? Well, you're often having these problems because you're making all these mistakes and you're just showing that you're putting yourself on the wrong side of issues, or you're showing you're not an exceptional attorney, or you're not able to drill down on certain matters and things. And it's just not good for you. So why do you do this? Why would you do it? And it's better to say nothing often than to say nothing at all if there could be any drawbacks. And just remember what this professor taught me in college of how to get the best grades possible when writing something. you just don't give them any reason to object. Then if they are to say that you're wrong. Same thing, if you're taking a math class, the best way to get the best grade is to allow the math professor to see how you're working through problems and reach the right conclusion. And if they don't have any objections, then you've done a good job with that math problem. And same thing in taking tests. If you miss things, then you get the answer wrong. So everything has to be you need to think about things in that way. And if you do that, you'll do very well. And then just the final point is just take a look, and I call it the scent test. The scent test basically says if I want people to think trust in the state's attorney, does this resume just talk about that? And do people walk away with it thinking nothing but trust in the state's attorney? Because the more crap you add on there that has nothing to do with being a trust in the state's attorney, the worse candidate you're going to look like to be hired. So you're just watering everything down, and you're detracting from the main message, which is, I need a trust in the state's attorney from the employer. Same thing with a client. The client needs a trust in the state's attorney. They don't want to know you're interested in doing 15 different things, because if you do that, they're not necessarily going to like you and they want to work with you. If you lead with anything about, say, sex, race, politics, and you want to put that on your law firm bio, people are not going to hire you based on that. Some people will. A lot of people will. They may like it, but other people won't. So you just need to be very straightforward. So we'll just take a quick break. And then when we come back, I will answer questions about this. I think the fact that you've watched this so far, because it's quite a bit of material, is great. This will definitely help you and hopefully change the direction of your career in a major way. And it can. Think about what you've just learned. If you go from if you could doubles or triples or quadruples or more than that, even the number of interviews you get, how hired, it can help. I did definitely commend you for watching. It's very helpful. But when we come back, I'll answer questions. I will answer questions if you like about your resume or anything to do with your career. And often I think the questions are a very valuable part of the webinar, just because the questions that you have are often a lot of other people have. So it's good to help other people with your questions. And then also the questions are anonymized, so I won't show your name if you're logged into Zoom or whatever, but then it can be a resource, the answers to those, for other people later on that are experiencing the same issues. So a quick break, and when I come back, we'll do questions. Thank you. All right, here's the first question. What is the percentage that one should request for bringing a client to a big law like Skadden? Nothing. You will give what they give you, if anything, and they probably won't. I don't know what Skadden says for associates. If it's a huge client, then maybe something. But you typically, with large law firms, they are going to be very organized and have all sorts of different rules for that. So you can't necessarily request any sort of percentage. They will give you what they give you. If they do the same thing with partners. Partners can't request a percentage if they bring in business. Was this presentation only for people looking for an in-house position or in-house as well? So I only do law firm placements, and So because I only do law firm placements, that's what I'm covering here. In-house people that are hiring for in-house don't always look for the same things as law firms do. So a CEO may be looking for something different than a law firm, but law firms typically will hire for law firms. But people that are in-house that know what they're doing will use a lot of the same things. So if the GCs worked in a big law firm, they're going to look at things through a certain lens. But in-house positions are different. In-house positions, like I'm working on a search right now for a major insurance company, and they're looking for someone that has operations experience as well as experience running a litigation department. So there's people, in-house jobs are often different, and it's not the same thing. So the next question. And these are great questions, by the way. Thank you for asking them. Should I remove older or less relevant legal experience from my resume if it makes my background look scattered? Yes. So what you do with less relevant legal experience, and let me see if I have this document I pulled up, I was excited about earlier, the PDF. Let me see. Oh, jeez. Sorry, I'm just looking for something here, like I'm not sure what this was. I did, prior to this webinar, I did do a document that I thought, or something that I thought would help everyone. Let me just see the resume. I don't know where it is. Let me not be. Let me see if I have it. Okay, I do have some information that I will send to everyone after the webinar. So I'll make sure that you receive the PowerPoints as well as another document. Yeah, so I was working on this prior to the webinar and some sort of rules that can be used for evaluating resumes. So I'll send this off to everyone. You see, I'm looking at this about resumes. So I've been working on this product for several years, which I'll tell everyone about, not in the future, but it goes through and looking at resumes, it's scoring resumes, and it's trying to find, it's looking for things where people have the kind of the most, let me just go over how to basically focus your resume. And so you typically, with your resume, you want to make sure that you're always leading with your practice area, and you want to make sure that your resume is focused on your practice area. So what you do when you have a resume with older, less relevant experience, you don't describe what you did. You just say you were an associate, an attorney there, and then you have a lot of information about your current experience. So you just have current position, and then say it was in corporate associate, 3 years. And then you have past position. And I do this with people every single day. So past position, I don't know, 2 years, litigation. So this is just an example. So what you do in this example is then you'd have all these, you could have bullet points or whatever, and talking about this position and things with everything corporate related. And then in your previous position, you might have been litigation. You would just say firm name, social, whatever. And then if you did any corporate, you could list a little bit, but you don't need to go into a lot of detail because you want the reader to just think current position and that's it and what you do. And then there's past things that have nothing to do with that. You don't want to really talk about them too much. And then the other thing that happens to a lot of attorneys is then they may have past position 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so in this case, what you do, it's fun. So instead of listing all these positions, some of it might have been a year or two, you just put a blurb that says between, 2018, worked at firms, including whatever, and people don't need a lot of detail. And if you did any corporate work there, worked on whatever, you just list that and you don't list a lot of detail. And if you do that, you're going to get a lot more jobs and things, because most people do is they think that they need to include every type of experience. This could be trademark. I mean, who knows what the person did? Trademark, real estate, but this was corporate. So you don't want people to think about all these different things. You want them to think corporate and then you put down you worked on these different things later on. It's just as simple as that. You could say you did some corporate and also got exposure to corporate trademark and real estate, but you don't want to, you want people to focus on this. And that's a big mistake that a lot of people make. Let's see. Okay, person's next question. I've been working hard to try to bring in clients, but my firm's case management and paralegal support sucks. I'm trying to stay positive, but I had someone contact me with a great case who was excited to retain me. I sent a paralegal from our firm to sign him up, but the paralegal completely canceled my client without telling me and did some other things which made him believe that my firm is very disorganized, so he chose not to retain me. And the paralegal completely lied about. So what happened to me, and I didn't find out the truth. I called my would-be client. I feel like this firm may ruin my reputation with people, and it's pissing me off because I've been working so hard. I told the firm owner that the paralegal lied to me and completely dropped the ball, and he said, "This can't be. Sign-up guys are great. That I should sign up my own cases. I guess I'll just bite the bullet." Yes. So yes, you should sign up your own cases. That partners do not send out paralegals to bring in their own cases. They go and they develop relationships with firms and companies and things over years. You have a relationship and for them to hire them. So no, you don't send out a paralegal. You go out on your own and you form a relationship with people. Everything is about the relationship. It's not, if you have a relationship with a client, they're going to stick with you. People want to work with people that they have a relationship with. So no, you don't send out paralegals to try to get cases for you. You think about your career. How can you possibly have a career how can you possibly rely on paralegals to sign up clients for you the rest of your career? It's not the paralegal's responsibility. It's yours. I don't know. Again, I'm not trying to be critical, but I don't know where you may have gotten the idea that it's okay to have paralegals do it. Now, maybe this is something related to auto accidents. There are places where that, but in general, you want to develop a relationship with a person. The attorneys that bring in business will have meetings and things they'll call up their clients often weekly just to chat and see how things are going or to tell them to give them updates and they'll be their friend. And so anybody can hire an attorney, but not everybody can get a relationship with someone that they like. So you want to do whatever you can to develop relationships with potential clients. That's the name of the game. You can't rely on other people to do that for you. And you also don't want to often develop enemies. So if a paralegal is your enemy within a law firm, they're going to look for reasons to tell the firm owner that you're doing something wrong. So just don't try not to get in that situation. Secretaries, paralegals, like a lot of times people drastically underestimate how important relationships are with them. Let me see. Again, I'm not trying to be critical because no one teaches these rules. And maybe your firm requires paralegals to do it instead of you, but you need to develop a relationship. And then maybe you need to prepare the paralegal differently for going out if that's how they sign people up. And then have a relationship with a paralegal because the paralegal will do a good job to the extent they feel like they like you. As a law student, can listing too many unrelated part-time jobs or extracurricular activities on my resume hurt my interview chances with law firms? Absolutely. Law firms only care about, for the most part, they care about your grades, maybe if you had some jobs prior to law school, and you can certainly list some positions, but if they're unrelated to practicing law, maybe you did something for 5 years prior to law school, but yes, you don't want to list unrelated things. People will do all sorts of stuff on their resume that's completely unnecessary. They'll talk about the fact that they played softball, and it's in law school. You want to draw attention to excellence and not push the reader in a direction where they're reaching conclusions that aren't necessary. I'll just tell you real briefly. I had a resume that did that and then became very simple. It was just, what did I do? I went UVA Law School, whatever, law review, what else? Maybe, I don't know, something else, pop percentage, whatever that was. And then I went Chicago, pop, whatever, percentage, whatever, just what else to do. That, I mean, that's it. Then I did federal clerkship. Sorry. Now, and then what else? Top law firm, number 2, and just say summer associate. That's it. And then literally, and this is how all the resume was. So summer associate, then summer 1, U.S. Department of Justice. That's it. Department honors program, whatever. And maybe nothing really other than that. I might have just listed maybe a little bit, but the resume was extremely sparse. But all that going to a decent law school and top percentage is great. Chicago top percentage. I think it was World Scholar finals for the thing, but it's just top things, nothing about fraternities, nothing about papers that had anything to do with anything else. Obviously, if you got into a good, if you did okay, and you don't need to say a lot. And if I wasn't in the top percentage of this, I would just say that. I'm just very sparse. And so people do not want to see a lot of other stuff. They can reach conclusions based on this information, and that's more interesting to them than a bunch of other stuff, which shows that you're not focused. I learned that. I think that's very important. Next question. Okay, for someone that's 3 years out of law school, is it best to list your experience first and then your education? No. So the rule is 5 years. And so after 5 years, education goes last. So that's the rule. But again, your job is to emphasize strengths. And so if you went to a low-ranked law school and college and nothing spectacular there, then you can list your experience first. If that's what makes you stronger, because you want to draw attention. So strengths, what people see first. So you want to do that. So even though the rule's 5 years, I think that not every attorney understands that, obviously. Or hiring person, your goal really is to emphasize your strengths first. So you don't necessarily need to do that, but that's the rule. Okay, what resume red flags can... So I'll send out a book about resumes. I'll try to remember. I've written books about it that I give to BCG candidates. But the resume red flags, I think I spoke about a ton of those in today's webinar. But let me see if I have this document pulled up that I was wanted to show you. I can't pull it up for some reason. I don't know how to just... Anyway, so the resume red flags are anything, there's a ton of them. The best ones are too much independence. That's one. The other one would be typos, etc. The resume that would be multiple jobs in a short period of time short period of time. The others would be different practice areas on the resume, different practice settings, being and typos, multiple jobs, different practice settings, gaps of unemployment. This is actually a really good question. I think I should probably be doing, if I haven't done it, I probably should do an article on this. Multiple jobs in a short period of time means that wherever the person goes, they're either getting fired or they're not able to make things go there, so they leave. Different practice areas mean that the person can't commit to something. So they may be interested in one thing or the other, but they're not committed to their practice area, or for whatever reason, they couldn't get jobs in their firm. Who knows? So that hurts. Different practice settings mean if someone's an attorney in a law firm and suddenly they go to work for the government, now they want to come back, or they go to work for in-house, that is probably a sign that they don't want to work in a law firm. So why would you hire someone from a different practice setting? Most law firms understand that. Almost all of them do, by the way. It's very difficult to get hired from in-house. It's easier in some practice settings than others. If you're working in a real estate company, doing real estate transactions, you want to go back to a law firm, sometimes that works a lot. But that gaps of unemployment means the person isn't working. So that's not good. Attorneys should always be working. The whole goal of an attorney, this is something that you should write down. And it's one of the most important things that any attorney could ever learn, is you never want to lose access to work. So in a law firm, your goal is to have people give you work as long as possible, and then to develop business so you can practice into your 70s or 80s if you enjoy it with your own clients. So you never want to lose access to work. What happens to people is they go in-house and they lose jobs, and then they lose access to work, or they go into the government, or they stop working. But you always need to have access to work. So the second you start practicing law, you always want to make sure that you have work to do. And so attorneys that are unemployed for whatever reason, that's not good. Short tenures in different places are not good because they're likely to leave. The basic rules are, can you do the job? At least do the job. Can you be managed? Will you do the job long term? Do you want the job? Do we like you? I mean, these are some of the most basic rules. So, and what does that mean? That means experience, demands of the job, etc. Demands, smarts, whatever that is. smarts, etc. So can you do the job? So everyone's asking that when they review a resume. So if someone doesn't look like they can do it, then that's a problem. Management means, does this person look like will follow orders? Does this person look like they are good with groups? You can tell them what to do, and just manageable. That's important. So that can they be managed? And then the next one is kind of long-term commitment. Will they stick around? And so that's important. So anything that shows that the person might not stick around is another big red flag. And then wanting the job, does it look like this person's career progression is to work for us? So that means moving up or down, moving up, down, like down, why? All the sorts of questions of job practice area fit, all these sort of things. So one thing that's interesting, anytime, if say you went to Stanford Law School and are coming from one of the top 10 most prestigious law firms in the United States, and you decide you want to apply for a small middle market firm that pays 1/3 of that. That middle market firm isn't going to interview you, even though you think they would, because they don't think you're going to want to work there. But why would you work there if you can make 3 times or 4 times as much? So people have to look like they want the job, and there's a reason for you to want to work there. So they ask about that. And then, like you, is there polarizing information on your resume? So you have to look at that. So all these questions, like the biggest ones in terms of red flags are experience, command, smarts, et cetera. You know, that if the person doesn't have that, low, poor law school, bad performance, that could be, for your firm might be, do they have experience, the right experience, et cetera. But manageability is the big one, long-term commitment, and then they look like they want it. And then those are the biggest things in terms of, but then typos and things and resumes that are too long, like I talked about. The next question. In the address resume of area of my resume of 2 towns, because you're 2 different places where I could stay, depending on which is more convenient. No, you just don't need to list. You can apply to certain firms that are close to where you're at, and others that aren't. However that works, but yeah, you want to have a correct place, the place that's convenient. I'm not convenient, but the place closest to the places you're applying, I would put that address in there if I could, and then, but otherwise you could leave it blank. But no, you don't want to look like you live in 2 different places. Okay, how can attorneys protect their careers when joining a firm with financial or leadership instability? So your goal is to never lose that. So you should try to avoid, if possible, joining law firms with that sort of instability, and try to find one that does. If that's the only job you can get, then fine, but you need to be looking probably for another one while you're doing that, just telling you frankly. Or you need to try to figure out what are people doing to stay there, or you need to get your own business. So one of the biggest things that when I was a young attorney, I realized after about 3 years of practicing was the only way to have a long-term career was to have my own work, because if I didn't have my own work, I would potentially lose access to work. If I got fired or my firm didn't have enough work, you always want to put yourself in a position where you have access to work. As a law student, should I accept the first legal job offer I receive, or should I wait to see if better opportunities become available? Generally, I would say it depends on your background. People with similar backgrounds as you are getting positions, and better positions than that, then the odds are that you may be able to do that. But the biggest thing for any attorney to keep in mind that's looking for their first job is, are you going to do something that's transactional in nature, or are you going to do something related to litigation? So those are the 2 types of positions that are available: transactional and litigation. So transactional people typically are people that gravitate towards math, science, rules, more rigid thinking, enjoy, excel at confrontational work, fictional work, not right, etc. So these are just different types of people. And then the people that do litigation like writing, they like confrontation to some extent. This is not a ton. Confrontation. They like multiple conclusions and ways to approaching problems. And it's different. And these people good in English students, whatever, history, like political science, whatever, things like that. So there are certain people when they're very young, typically will sometimes when you're in even elementary school, you will either be better and gravitate towards more math and science, or you'll gravitate towards things that are more transactional, litigation, writing. And most people prefer one or the other. What is it you gravitate towards? So that would be, if you're a law student, really the main thing is what is the type of job you get. The other issue is with the firms you're facing. So you have consumer facing and then you have company facing. So consumer facing means it can be station, personal injury, social mistakes, insurance defense, which is basically representing car crashes for insurance companies, but smaller things. So you have consumer facing and people that cannot afford to pay, usually low middle bills, with people that can't afford to pay large bills, with limited resources. So that, and there's certain practice areas, and you can, I'm not going to list them all here, but those are consumer facing practice areas. Then you have company facing practice areas. So company facing practice area, but that is a practice area where you're representing a company, and companies have more resources and can afford to hire best attorneys for a lot. And the bigger the company, the more money it has. So what happens is when a company has an issue, like they will go to the firms that can best represent them. They will be concerned with their experience, their focus, and the companies can pay a lot of money. So you, as a law student, you can either go to a consumer-facing firm where the training's not going to be as rigid because companies that pay bills can afford to have people look at stuff in great depth. But if it's a consumer, they want to save money. They don't want to spend a lot on divorce. So you have to decide if you want to work for a consumer-facing company firm or a company-facing. So you're going to basically make more money if you go to a company-facing firm versus a law-facing firm. So that would be, and when people go to the biggest law school, the most prestigious law schools, they typically will get jobs with places that are company-facing, whereas the lower-ranking law schools will often be consumer-facing. So that's, yeah. So. Do you suggest getting rid of the executive summary at the top of the resume? Yes. Let the reader reach their own conclusions about your resume. You don't need to put that at the top. How much should a counsel at Milbank get if he or she moves to counsel at White Case? I have no idea. I don't, those are both peer firms, I would say. So I don't know if someone should get a salary increase from moving one to another. You might, but generally, if I was making a move like that as counsel, I would be most concerned about which position seems the most stable for me. Where am I going to continually get the most work over time? Is it going to be a Milbank? Are they going to keep me around? Will I have a lot of employment security there, or am I going to be better at White and Case? Those firms also both have different cultures. So some people are going to be more comfortable with the culture at White and Case and want to stay there in the long run. Other people may not be as comfortable. So it's just, you have to think about things that way. How should attorneys ask for more time to review a law firm job offer without losing the opportunity? The more time you ask to look at a review of a law firm job offer, the more you're communicating to that firm that you're not their first choice and that you might leave in the future. So ideally, the best thing you can do is accept the job as soon as you receive it. But if you don't, you can ask for a week or something, then that's fine too. Or the firm gives you a week, 2 weeks. But typically asking for extensions are not a good idea. Every time I made an offer to someone and they've asked for extra time, more time, they've always come and left and not been the best hires. So I wouldn't, if you have an offer and it's a decent opportunity, you don't think you're going to nothing's going to be materially different, then you probably don't, then asking for more time is not always the best idea. The other thing to think about is during your first 5 years of experience, more so than salary, and people don't realize this, you think you're going to law school to make money, but when you come out, you're actually going to need to get training. So people don't understand how important it is to get training in early positions. And so the training that you get is really more important. So are you being trained in a practice area that you want? And if that's the case, and then if you're looking for more time and you don't because you want to get better training somewhere, then that's a good idea. But in general, I don't think it's a good idea for people to ask for more time and to get positions. It's, again, I'm not recommending this, but if you get another offer, you have to decide if you've accepted something. It's up to you. There's ethics and things involved, but I would be very careful about that. So people make that mistake kind of all the time. Next question. What's the best way to handle jobs focused on areas of practice unrelated to the job you're applying for, assuming we don't want to leave unexplained gaps in our resume? So you just, first of all, hopefully you're in the practice area that you're applying a job for right now. Assuming you're over that hurdle, then you just don't talk about your previous experience or the practice area you were doing. You just basically say what your job title was, or if you've had 5 or 6 jobs over 20 years, you just basically put everything on a lot in one line, say various law firms and whatever, and then you list some of those in the 20 years of experience gaps. It's literally, you could go, I don't know, 19 or 2002 to 2015, whatever. Worked at several firms, whatever. You just, or you don't, was an associate at several firms, including whatever. Literally, this is what people do, and it works. And then if you had any trust in the states experience, if you want to be trust in the states or whatever, then you list some of that there, but you don't draw attention to it. You only draw attention to what you're doing. There's nothing wrong with listing the dates and just saying, I don't know, various law firms. It's not the best language. You would want to, again, can use prompts and things with AI programs to basically do that. But you want to remember the reader should only think your practice area. And if you don't do that, then they're going to hire someone that makes them think that way. So you have to think about things that way. So I'm reading them. I'm a recent LLM tax graduate pursuing tax and estate planning opportunities. My only direct relevant experience is from the tax plan and Vita work while in law school. Most of my professional experience comes from a family law firm. Should I remove the family law experience from my resume? No, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being a family law attorney and going to school to get an LLM in tax and then wanting to go and do trust in the state for tax. So I would just leave that on your resume, and then it shows probably you have client skills and other things, and then start trying to apply to firms. Hopefully you're going to have much more luck doing trust in the states, and there are so many trust in the states attorneys in every city of the country. There's always tons of them. I mean, decent sized city, like more than 5,000 people. So there's always going to be trust in the states places. I think that's perfectly fine. And I don't know how much experience you had as a family law attorney, but it's possible to make that practice area switch. Just in this particular case, because there's so much demand for trust in the states people, especially people that understand the tax aspects of things. It's going to be 10 times more easy for you to find positions doing that rather than tax law, because tax law typically supports, not all types of tax law, but supports the corporate department, for example, M&A and things like that. And so those jobs are going to want people with more of a traditional corporate background or a more traditional background working for larger companies. But in terms of estate planning, yes, you can use that. Okay, next question. This is a good question. Thank you for asking this. So this question is, what should attorneys know before accepting contract legal work or temporary legal positions? The first thing to know is you do not have to. There are hundreds of thousands of law firms, and there's solos, small firms, whatever firms, all sorts of firms, all over the country, all over wherever you're trying to work, whatever city, there's firms everywhere. So the people you can work for all over the country, all over your city, wherever you're working. So you don't have to. You're better off working for someone and getting more sophisticated legal work or just regular legal work If you work as a contract attorney, you're showing that you may not value working in a law firm and getting trained. You may not value a typical associate partner relationship. And but the other problem being a contract attorney or temporary attorney is that the work you're doing is typically not going to be that sophisticated or that interesting. So that can hurt you. So you're not going to be getting the best training. So you typically want to avoid taking those sorts of positions. Now, I realize people take them for money and all sorts of reasons, but in general, you never need to do that. And the reason you don't need to do that is because there's plenty of solo practitioners, or if a good person shows up, they're always decent. There, people wants to work, they'll hire them if they have the work. They'll give them an hourly position or something. So you want to be trained and you want to have access to more sophisticated work, and you don't want to pigeon yourself into one of these contract or temporary attorney roles. And if you do that for whatever reason, you're better off just not discussing it on your resume, because you don't want to kind of say it looks like you don't know how to get a job or you haven't gotten a job. So you're better off applying to finding a job. The other mistake that people make too, by the way, when they're looking for jobs, is they use only LinkedIn or Indeed. So Law Crossing, which I own, is a good way to find jobs because it goes to law firm websites and company websites, but law firms are what you should be concerned about, that have jobs on their websites that aren't, and most law firms put jobs on their websites, or a lot of them do, but they don't advertise them. So they don't get a lot of applications. There's thousands of law firms in most decent sized cities. So most of those thousands of law firms aren't necessarily advertising their jobs. And so because they're not, and no one's thinking of them, going to their website, when you apply to them, you're much more likely to get hired than if you're applying to firms like on Indeed or LinkedIn, where there's just massive amounts of advertising and they're getting tons of applications. Employers are paying thousands of dollars often to attract candidates. So doing things that way can help you tremendously. And so I'd recommend Law Crossing, and then also just unsolicited applications to places. And that can help you quite a bit. So I think I got most of the questions here. Let me see. Should I downplay defense experience when applying for a plaintiff's side position? No. So if you're applying for a plaintiff's position, people will know where you worked if you were doing defense, and if you're applying for a defense position trying to be plaintiffs, everyone will know that. The employers are not dumb; they can know what your law firm does, et cetera. But that doesn't really matter. I see plaintiffs people hiring defense people all the time, and vice versa. It can hurt you to some extent. Some practice areas won't necessarily like that. Some firms won't, like employment, for some reason, like they much prefer people to be on one side of the fence than the other when they hire them, but personal injury often not. So no, you don't necessarily need to downplay that, and you shouldn't, because law firms will understand and pick up on it anyway. Well, thanks a lot for being on this webinar today. I do have some materials I think will be helpful for you that I'll circulate in the next day or so, the PowerPoint. And I'll also send everyone, just from being on this call, a book I wrote about resumes. And so that should be coming hopefully in the next day or so. So thanks again for being on this. I hope this was helpful. Again, I think it's an extremely important topic, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your week. Thanks.